We also I don't like it.
Crazy.
Hi.
Hi.
All right. I'm sorry about that. Please go for it.
Oh, okay. Just start.
Yep. I'll give you your presentation. I'll give you access to be able to share your slides.
Okay. Okay. Do we have a lot of people out there?
I can't see yet, so go for it. Just if you want to share your slides, and then I will take a look on the other side.
Sure. And is there a chance for them? I wasn't sure. I thought I'd ask this beforehand, but is there a chance for them to ask questions?
Yep, in the Q&A.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Sorry about the delay. Just a couple issues, I think, with getting everything started, but I'm glad that I could join you today. My name is Delaney King, and I am here to talk about neurodiverse brains. So hopefully, can you give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can see my screen, if you can hear me well? If you can't, please let me know, and that way I can try and make any changes, just so that we're all on the same page. And happy Halloween. It's nice to see everybody. I know we're starting a little bit late, so I'll try my best to get through all of the stuff that we have going on today. But if we don't manage to get through it, I'm happy to connect with people on LinkedIn and answer any questions they might not have after the fact. So if you're in this workshop, we're going to be talking about neurodiversity, creating adaptable curriculum for adults. And I'm going to try and focus on post-secondary and corporate training and things like that. So, okay, great. People are giving a thumbs up. That's awesome. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Like I said, we're already running behind, and I want to try and get through everything I can. So, like I said, we're going to talk about some common neuro differences, some of the challenges, and then how to kind of apply universal design strategies as best as possible. And then finally, if we have time, which I don't know if we're going to, I was going to do a small little case study, but that's okay. Like I said, if you have any questions, I'm happy to connect with you. I've been in the adult learning realm for quite a few years. I have a master's in adult education with a specialization in neurodifferences. And I've been working with adults all over to kind of talk about, you know, what does it mean to be neurodiverse? What does it mean to be working in the workplace with that neurodiversity, and things like that. So I welcome all questions, and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. If you don't know what a term means, please just ask it in the Zoom, and they will ask me to clarify it for you. There are no silly questions or stupid questions. All questions are welcomed, especially if they're coming from a place of just wanting to make the world a more inclusive place for everybody. So what is neurodiversity? It's basically the idea that all of our brains are different and unique. One of the best ways I've ever heard this described is our brains are like forests and an ecosystem. And so they all grow differently, right? No two forests are the same. And if something happens and something gets removed from that forest, say a tree falls down, or you know, there's like a bit of a fire, something else grows in its place. Your brain is very similar with the way that the neurons connect and that they form in a certain way, and our brains are all formed very differently. And so neurodiversity celebrates the diverse ways in which our brains function. And I kind of want to talk about how we can make it more neuro-inclusive. So some of the common neurodiversities that I come across that a lot of people have questions about are, I think a lot of people have heard of autism and Aspies. Just a heads up, people don't use Asperger's much anymore just because there's some negative tendencies towards a researcher that coined that term. OCD, ADHD, I myself am ADHD, and I thrive in it now that I understand it, but I wasn't diagnosed until like my mid-30s. Tourette's, dyslexia, my daughter has dyslexia and ADHD. Dyscalculia is the one where you have struggle with numbers. Depression, dysgraphia, anxiety, bipolar, and dyspraxia. So these are just a few I wanted to throw up there. Obviously, There's lots more. And people are always asking me, like, does this fall under the umbrella? Does this, it really depends. People have different variations and definitions, but 100% of the time, neurodiversity can be seen as just something that is very complex, and it's still kind of a thread that we're unraveling. We're trying to figure out, what fits and what doesn't fit. And lots of times too, our neurodifferences have comorbidities. And what that means is that this is not driving alone. So, my ADHD has a passenger called anxiety, and they like to drive together. So a lot of times too, people have one, they typically have something else that comes with that. And so when you're dealing with building inclusive curriculum and ideas, a lot of the time you're not just dealing with one thing, you're dealing with multiples. And so today I'm going to try and approach it through a more generic, kind of broad lens. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be a one size fits all. That just doesn't work for most people. But like I said, I'll try my best. So the question I wanted to ask today was to the group, why is it important to you to create an inclusive curriculum or training? So if you wouldn't mind sharing some of your ideas in the chat, why is it important for you to create inclusive curriculum and training? And when I think of inclusivity, it's something that benefits everyone, not just neurodivergent learners. It creates a supportive environment. It fosters like collaboration and understanding. So one of the things that's really important as a company or as a team or as a school is to have clearly defined culture and understand your values and goals. And, how do those relate back to people that are neurodifferent? So if one of your goals is that everybody can thrive, well, as somebody with ADHD, I can tell you without a doubt that I don't do well in long meetings. I can struggle with sounds in the background, but whereas somebody else might thrive in that. And so it's really important to understand that we're all going to have different routes on how we get there and what we're going to need to be successful in where we are. So I haven't seen anything yet from the host as if we have any questions. If you do have a response, please throw it up in the chat for me. I would love to see them. And yeah, if the session host can let me know if you can see them as well, that would be great. So what are some benefits to being inclusive? I think that's important. Like I said, I wanted to just kind of try and focus on some of the key pieces here. So what are the benefits to being inclusive? Well, from an autism standpoint, one area of strength is that they can see the details. They can kind of get down into the weeds and see all the things that sometimes ADHD people who are like more big picture thinkers won't see. And they're able to kind of see all the pieces that make things, go or can be put together. With ADHD, we're seen as being more creative. And so when people say thinking outside the box, we are already outside the box. We've been out there for a while trying to see how things are going. And that for us is we can kind of see the whole picture or how we want the picture to come together. With dyslexia, they found that people with dyslexia are really good with pictures and images. And they thrive really well with the idea that if you have a picture, they're able to relate it. And so if you're not sure, a lot of people think like dyslexia is, I get my words backwards. That's not actually it. They struggle with the phonetics of words. And so, for example, when you see a cat and then you picture a cat in your head, and then you think of the phonetic spelling K-A-T, cat, right? That's important because then we put that into our long-term memory. But if you have dyslexia, right, your brain is like, I can't think of that way that it's written out phonetically. And so it can be a struggle to put the idea of the picture cat into long-term memory. But you're really good with pictures. And so if you say to somebody, how do you see this goal coming together? How do you see this project coming together? Instead of getting them to write it out, if somebody is willing to say, like, I have dyslexia, you can ask them, can you draw it out? Can you draw me what success looks like for this team? Can you show me how people would be working together, right? That's one way to actually bridge that gap. A lot of the times their brains can see things that our brains may not see necessarily. Anxiety is another one where people that have anxiety actually do really well in stressful situations because they're resilient. They've built strength up. They've built the ability to kind of overcome challenging and difficult times. And so there's actually a group in the Salish Coast, I think it's in Washington, where a lot of people have said that they feel that they are depressed and that they recognize depression, but the community recognizes depression as a part of their being. And that when people are depressed, it's a way for them to express that they want to be felt, needed, and seen in that world. And so a lot of times people say, you know, I don't want to hunt. This is going back to, you know, times before. I don't want to hunt. I don't want to gather, and I'm not going to do it. And that could be seen as a form of depression, but it's also seen as a way of people coming and saying, we need you to hunt. We need you to gather. You are important to us. Join the community. And so a lot of times, you know, people think, well, anxiety, they're going to not know what to do. I mean, people watch Inside Out 2, which is a very, very cute movie, but not necessarily how anxiety functions in our brains. And then finally, OCD. That's another one I've had people talk to me about, and they say, like, what can we do? Well, they have done studies where people with obsessive compulsive disorder thrive in planning events. They thrive in seeing the details. Again, if you think about this, if you have somebody who's autistic and somebody that has OCD working together, somebody that can see all of the parts as the whole, right? And the other person knowing how to make those plans come together, these teams can work very well. Now, do people have to wear their neurodifference out there for you to understand that? No, not necessarily. Some people aren't comfortable talking about it. I get that. I'm one of them that, like, I will openly just be like, yeah, I know I have anxiety. I know I have ADHD. And here's why I know my strength base are. I just had some ideas thrown up in the chat. So here are some comments. We can't draw on people's strengths if they can't access the content. My daughter was diagnosed with autism last year. I want a world where she can thrive and feel confident. That is awesome. And one of my big things is I love to focus on strength-based skills. And that is really important, that we don't look at people as deficits in our teams. We look at them as bringing strengths that nobody else has. And that's oftentimes the way I want teachers to approach the world as well, as somebody who used to be a teacher in the public sector. Diversity allows a greater understanding and allows for more creative thinking. Absolutely. I'm a student success coach and a former K-12 educator. I want to learn more so I can also try to see the world from a different perspective. That's awesome. And that's amazing. I love it. So I have a question for the group, and I'm going to ask you to answer it in the chat, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more, and then I'll come back to it. But I would love you to take a guess on what you think the top 5 strengths are of neurodivergent people in a neurotypical world. And you can just make one guess, you can make multiple guesses, all is welcome. So any guesses on what the top 5 strengths are of neurodivergent people in a neurotypical world? So when you think about your own strength base, maybe it's time management. Do you think maybe that's one of them? So write your answers in the chat, and I'll get the host to pull them over and throw them into the chat for me so I can take a look at them. While we're doing that, and we're talking about the benefits of inclusion, so divergent thinkers often bring, like I said, worldviews that were not necessarily what we consider typical. And they actually did a study, and they found that neurodiverse teams are 30% more productive than neurotypical ones. And they actually make fewer errors, which I think is amazing, because you're working together and, you know, you have people that are like, I can't see it this way, but here's how I would view the world. And when you think about way, way back when people were living in small groups and tribes, there was neurodifferences then, right? The ADHD was the traveler, they were the hunter, they were the searcher. They truly believed that autistic people may have been the farmers of the world. They knew how to put things together, that kind of thing. So it's really interesting to me to see that we've always had neuro-inclusive teams. We just don't necessarily take advantage of all the awesome things that they bring to us. So one of the answers was thinking outside the box. Okay, I love it. Are there any other answers? Please throw them in the chat. But they did do a study, because I love studies, and they found the top 5 strengths of neurodivergent teens to be hyperfocus, creativity, innovative thinking. Oh, I see innovation just came up. Awesome, great answer. Innovation, yeah, unique, love it. Detailed processing and authenticity. So these are the top 5 that people have when they come in. And if you're like, which neurodivergence does this come from? This study actually looked at a wide variety of neurodiversities, from like ADHD to autism. There's multiples in it. So this is a broad look at that. And if you're wondering, hey, you talk a lot with your hands. Thank you. Welcome to ADHD. I love talking with my hands. And if you know somebody loves talking with their hands, I would tell you to question whether or not they have ADHD. Apparently, it's a common thing. So these are the top things that a neuro-inclusive team brings to the table. So what are some of the common challenges? And before we kind of pop into that roadmap of universal design, there are lots of challenges. They include like fitting into what we consider neurotypical team dynamics, things like stress-inducing events. And so for myself, I know I don't thoroughly enjoy icebreakers. They make me nervous and uncomfortable, and I oftentimes don't know what to say, and I'm like, ugh. And so things like that can be a stopper for me. I'm not sure what to say next. A lot of times our recruitment processes, whether they be for schools or for work, are unintentionally exclusive. So if I have dyslexia, and perhaps I have, dyspraxia, I may make spelling errors, but that doesn't mean that it wouldn't be a great addition to the team. Or for ADHD, a lot of times we don't read the details. We just read the big print because that's all we really want to see in that moment. And so we miss putting in small things as you go along. And so those can be really unintentionally exclusive, right? And kind of weeding out people that maybe would be a great addition to your team. There's also a really big misconception that accommodation costs a lot of money, and it really doesn't. And I'll talk about different accommodations that maybe are minimal or even cost for, there's no cost associated with them. Some people are resistant to change because they feel like if you make accommodations, that everybody's going to want that accommodation. And that's really not true. There are studies that have shown that making small accommodations along the way doesn't mean that everybody's going to jump on and want that accommodation, right? Even in schools, I've seen kids that are like, oh, it's exciting, but then it kind of dies off. But that person that needs it still really utilizes it every day. And then there's also discrimination. Unfortunately, stereotyping. I've had people say things to me sometimes about neuro-inclusive, or, I have a son who I believe is on the autism circle. I don't believe in spectrums, but the circle. And so when I say circle, I mean that there are 11 executive functioning skills, and I think of it like a giant pie. And so kids sometimes are really good at some things and not great at other things. And so they may be really good at time management, but they're not great at understanding social regulation. And so with my son, he's told me, like, I don't understand the jokes at school sometimes, Mom. I don't get what they're laughing at. And I can see, he becomes hyper-focused. He's got very specific things happening that I can see it in him. And so a lot of times people are like, oh, their child's autistic. They're like the good doctor, or they're Rain Man, or they're like these, very funneled visions of what autism is. And that's not true at all. You can have wide varieties of neurodifferences with varying scales of how that looks for somebody. So I think it's important that we talk a little bit about universal design. You may have heard of universal design, and it's the design of products and environments that make it usable for everybody. And so one of the things that I wanted to do today was kind of go through the roadmap of what I would include. Now, I know I'm going really fast, and I do apologize because I want to try and get as much information out there as I can. But if you have any questions, like I said, please put them in the chat, and they can throw them over to me, and I'll try and answer them as best as I can. So a lot of times when we talk about universal design, people instantly think, oh, I have to go through and revamp everything. This is going to be a massive undertaking. Actually, not true. You can make small steps and small changes that will make for a more inclusive environment. And so one of the things that I like to think about is with universal design guidelines as a reference, there's kind of two broad areas that I would focus on if I was going to do universal design for a neuro-inclusive roadmap. One is providing sustainable effort and persistence. So in terms of student engagement or worker engagement, we want to promote students in sustaining their effort and persistence. In terms of action and expression, we want to support their executive functioning abilities. If you're not sure what executive functioning is, throw it up on the chat. We can talk about it here. In reality, also, right, we want to make sure that students feel that they have appropriate goal setting, that they're supported in this. So it's really important to note that as we build student strategies in these areas, so say, for example, their effort and persistence, that couples with goal setting and appropriate, like, building towards what they want. So they go hand in hand. Ultimately, we want the students to become the experts in the way that they learn. But if I was to say, where do you start? These are the two that I start with. We want them to be sustainable effort on the 11 executive functioning key skills. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, we're going to dive into it right now. So here's my roadmap. These are the things that I think are really important, and I'm going to go over each one in detail. But these are the things that I think if you're going to start, this is where I would start. And like I said, you don't have to jump in and try and do all 6. Start with 1 and see how that works, right? Because you want students to know that they're here and that they're important and that you're focusing on their strengths. I just have to grab a Kleenex. My apologies. I have 3 kids at home and they brought home a cold, which is just wonderful. Okay. So the first thing was focusing on overall approach. And that means that if you're going to be inclusive, you want to kind of move away from compliance and think more about active engagement. This could mean like talking to employees about the barriers that they face. And then as again, like, you know, do they even understand what they need? And are they encouraged to express what they need? So for example, active engagement. This is one where I think about the idea of mandatory fun. There's a lot of issues with mandatory fun in school settings and in work settings. And so sometimes people will be like, well, we want to have this big thing where everybody's going to get together and they're going to be, you know, throwing this ball around and, you know, all these other things happening. Well, if you have OCD, maybe you don't like touching things people have touched. If you have autism, maybe you don't like the sound of people yelling and screaming and like fighting for the chance to do something. If you have, you know, ADHD, it can be really hard to focus in on one thing when there's multiple things happening around you. And so that can take away from your active participation. And so I always say, like, it's really important to think about, is this event going to be really loud? Is there going to be lots of things going on? And if you do say have a student recruitment night, is there a chance for them to come to a second event that maybe has lower lighting? It's more of a quiet setting. They don't have to actively engage with others. You can even have colored name tags that say green means come up and talk to me. Yellow means I'll talk to you if I want to. And red means I'm just here, but I want to be involved, right? And that's a way for them to kind of initiate that active approach without just being thrust into what we call the neurotypical kind of standards. Again, yeah, we'll get the host to check the chat for me, so I'll continually check for questions there. Using clear language. This is a really important one. But at home, I've been working with my son on understanding sarcasm. That's something he doesn't get. And so he told me, like, I don't know what that means, or I don't understand. And I went to a conference where they were talking about different people. And the one guy said, you know, we have a large group of autistic workers. And he said there was a gentleman there that would make a joke that said, like, working hard or hardly working. And the response was, well, I was working hard until you interrupted me. You know, now I'm not working hard at all. And so there wasn't that ability to understand that it was a joke or it was a pun, right? And that doesn't mean that you have to stop them. It just means that you want to use really clear language, especially if you say you're sending an email and you have specific things you want. right? There are ways that you can direct that email to people to say, here's the actionable steps I want, or here's what I'm looking for, instead of getting them to look through the weeds to find the information. Rethinking academics is another important one. A lot of people can struggle with traditional westernized settings of schools, and they may not come through what we, having the degrees that we expect them to have. But that doesn't mean that they don't have the excellence to go through and be really awesome members of the team. So there are more places opening up that are neuro-inclusive schools. But sometimes if somebody has, like I talked to an awesome lady who is a astrophysicist, and she has dyslexia and autism. And she said she struggled in school, hard. Like she's like, and they didn't get a lot of, you're going to be great, you're going to be awesome. She was told, like, where are you, what are you going to do? Right? Are you going to go anywhere? And so she had to work harder to get where she wanted to be. But she said, like, her route to that place wasn't traditional, is what we expected from people. And then if you're doing interviews for school or for work, there are a few things that you can do to be really inclusive. One of them is not asking traditional questions, and if you're curious, I don't have time today, but send me a LinkedIn and I'd be happy to send some stuff your way. And also sending the questions out in advance, because if I'm nervous and I have to read the question, or I have to think on the spot, right? Or maybe I'm not comfortable with silence, it gives me time to practice my answers. And it gives me time to be in a space where I can actually test it on other people, so that they can say to me, yeah, that was really good, or here's what I would do differently. And it allows that adaptability. I don't see any questions so far, so I'm just going to keep going. And I hope that everybody's still with me. Another one that I would say is focusing on outputs and not inputs. And that means, like, when we think about what's sent and received, people think it's a very transactional, I sent the email, they read the email. But unfortunately, we live in a world where all of us interpret things differently. And so there's something called rejection dysmorphia, I think it is, with ADHD people, who will read something and be like, oh my goodness, this person hates me. Oh my goodness, this person doesn't like me. And that has nothing to do with the person that sent the email. It means, like, that they have applied a tone to that email, and now they think, oh my goodness, like, somebody's really upset. And so the organization or the group should be a little less rigid around thinking about, if I sent this, they'll read it and this is the way it is. Or say somebody sends you something and you read it and you're like, oh, that was blunt. Don't assume that they've actually attached anything to that. And sometimes you can even put in there, hey, I just want to make sure that I'm not upset. This is just something I want to talk to you about. And here's what I wanted to talk to you. Here's the list. Come and see me if that makes you feel more comfortable, or text me if that makes you feel more comfortable. It can take people sometimes a longer time to master the whole idea of oral communication, especially if maybe you're not used to it, or you're not comfortable with it, or asking people how they like to be communicated best. One of the ideas I've given teachers in the adult learning space is to have a list of things, to say, like, hey, what's the best way for me to talk to you? Is it via text? Is it via email? Is it via in person? What's your choices? Right? And if you're uncomfortable via in person, what can I do to make you feel more comfortable? Asking people can kind of get that conversation rolling in the right direction. I also have a list of questions here that you can think about from a teacher or a manager standpoint. Do they have access to communication methodologies that work for them? Are you respecting them, or are you treating them like somebody that has to be fixed? Right? So sometimes I call the old school mentality is, well, they'll just have to get used to it. This is the way it's always been done. Yeah, and I think about this. I think about my parents telling me when they were in school, they would tie left-handed kids' arms down and make them write with the right hand, because that was the right way to do it. Right? Sometimes the way we did things are not the best way to do things. And so it's really good to rethink that idea. Again, thinking about, are you allowing them to express themselves, or asking them, hey, what's the best way we can work on this together? This is a really good way to look at this. And yes, I can share this with you. Just let me know. Any questions or concerns as I'm going along, I keep asking because I always encourage them. And if things are making sense, maybe give us a thumbs up. I can't see anything, so I apologize. The other thing is accommodation has multiple meanings. And so a lot of times, like we talked about at the beginning, accommodation does not mean it has to be really expensive or something massive, right? Traditionally, technology has been used to accommodate, but there are other ways that you can accommodate people. So for example, text to speech, allowing text to be spoken out is one way that doesn't have to be super expensive. And yet people with dyslexia do better having someone read to them than they do reading themselves. I know this from my daughter. If I read her something versus her reading it, she takes so much more away from it. Another one is word prediction. So again, if I'm nervous and I'm putting something together and I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want this to look, bad or wrong. Grammar checkers are a cheap way for people to feel more confident in what they're sending. I often make mistakes still, right? And I was taught, and I would consider this again, the old school methodology of school that everything should be pristine and perfect when somebody sends you something. And now I've come to realize that doesn't change the ideas that are held within that text, right? They still are great ideas. Maybe they have a few spelling mistakes with them. Another great one is mind mapping. And so if you have a group of people together and you're trying to take an idea and you want to figure out, right, how can we take this idea and apply it, or we want to expand it, you can have them in their own way. Maybe they draw pictures. They have a picture and then they map out that picture with drawings. Maybe they like just to have words and then they draw the connections to those words. Or sometimes they can just write down, like, I want to be here, but here's why I am, and I'm not sure how I can get there. And then they can walk through and any way they want to do that, whether it be pictures, whether it be words, maybe it's even like using like Play-Doh or clay. I've seen people do that where they're like, I just can't get this idea out, and they use something else. And so the stimulation on your hands towards something is called stimming, is seen in different ways, can actually help your brain with those connections. Voice recognition is another great one that you can utilize that's not very expensive. It can even be something as simple as a checklist. Hey, we're having a meeting. Can you just quickly tell me, like, does the sound of crunching food bother you? Because then we won't serve food. Or maybe it's just something as simple as somebody prefers low lighting. Another one I've seen is people have to say, like, cameras have to be on. And this is something I guess is a personal preference, but to me, some people don't like the camera because they find it distracting to themselves. They struggle with it, right? And so there are ways that you can accommodate having to have your camera on all the time. Maybe you make, the accommodation that you will have your camera on from when you're speaking. And then when you're not speaking, it can be off. So a lot of times there are like simple accommodations that can be made. And like I said, it can be something as simple as a dimmer switch in an office. Maybe somebody has a sign outside that says hyper focusing right now. I will, please don't knock. I will come to you when I'm ready, that kind of thing. I have one of those signs. Those things are not highly expensive or a big investment. Another thing is communication styles. So it's important to think about processing time. If you're not familiar, processing time is, say you ask somebody a question, well, their brain actually has to process what you've said and what they want to say back to you. But sometimes people don't give enough time for that, right? And so effective communication is kind of the bedrock of a really strong community. And by offering choices, considering various communication styles and methods, you're making a more inclusive dialogue. And so some of the things that I like to think about are, is it a safe space where they feel that they can share with you, maybe that they're uncomfortable and they don't know what to say? Is it a space where they can ask for additional information? So I remember when I first started my career, I was always nervous to ask, like, I don't understand this, or I don't know what to do, because I thought I would get in trouble. People might be mad at me. People might expect more from me. And so if they don't have the right information, they don't know how to start something. And so you need to be, again, more inclusive of just thinking about how can we add something where they can tell us, how can they tell us that they need more information? And then there's direct and indirect. So speaking clearly is really important. Try to avoid using like slang or idioms or sarcasm, especially because it can cause confusion, like I was saying before. Sometimes people don't understand or don't hear the tone that comes with sarcasm, and that's really hard, right? If everybody else is laughing and you don't understand why, then you might not know how to formulate a response. Asking preferred methods of communication, right? Before you even start, saying to people when they are hired or when they start school, like I said, here's that list. Tell us what's your number one way to be contacted, and then what's the last way you want to be contacted. It doesn't mean you take it completely off the table. It just means that you know the best way to approach them. Encourage communication by asking questions that'll help people to kind of share their thoughts. So instead of just asking one question, if you can, and if it's possible, ask it in a couple different ways. Because sometimes people may not understand it and freeze up. And so if you can ask it in a couple different ways, or like when I'm doing here, going along saying, are there any questions? Please put them in the chat, or please reach out to me if you don't want to put them in the chat. That's okay. I'm happy to answer them on LinkedIn. There's lots of different ways to communicate. And so not everybody's comfortable putting a question up because they may think that they look silly, or, I don't like to use the word stupid, but people use it. Like I said, I don't know if the host can take a peek in the chat and see if there's anything there that I need to take a look at. I'd be happy to answer it. The other thing is environment. This is a big one. Sensories are a big one. We have 5 senses, and they affect all of our neurodivergent brains differently. I have to keep drinking my drink because my throat is very dry. I apologize. So specific environments, and I'm not saying that people need a sensory room. That's what people say sometimes. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying is like, it can be something as simple as reducing the lighting, leaving the option of like being able to turn your phone off and just having music playing. Maybe there's a specific type of music that people help them to focus. Is there a way for them to recover? So if you're somebody that's okay being, if you've ever gone to like a conference, which you're at right now, and at the end of the day, you go to your room and shut the door and you're like, I don't want to see another human being, right? I don't want to talk to anybody. You've hit your physical limit. Well, that can happen for people at work in the middle of the day, right? And so giving them an option of just being like, hey, here's a sign, put it out. I don't want to talk to anybody for the next 20 minutes. I need time to recover. My brain needs time to recuperate. Having the idea of just talking as a group, because like I said, everybody has a different viewpoint of what is a safe space. And then basically it's not that you're trying to point people out and say, oh, you don't like this light, or you don't like this sound. It's just that our brains are all very different when it comes to sensories. So creating a safe space can be something as easy as just having a very comfortable space. Maybe it's got low lighting. Maybe it has the noise canceling headphones where people can just go in and be at their quiet zone. And in that room, people don't talk. Or maybe it's a room where you go in and it's just a given that if people are in there, they don't want to be disturbed. Maybe it's something like having flexible start and end times for people, right? There have been studies done showing that people with ADHD work better in the evenings than they do in the mornings. I never really did well with a 9 to 5. I don't think I ever would. I like having the flexibility of when I can start and stop. I like to take breaks that are longer some days and shorter other days. It's also good to try and offer a social interaction online for meetings, right? If you're like, hey, we're all going to go to this place and it's going to be loud, and well, maybe that's not for everybody. So maybe you offer the ability to join online, or maybe you offer a second place where you say, hey, if you're not comfortable in crowds, that's okay. We're going to have this meeting and it's going to be a shorter time span. And it's just going to be talking about these things in advance. Because again, the unknown can cause a lot of panic for people. And then building bridges is another one, right? So I like to say the perils of mandatory fun is exhausting, and people want to feel valued, but they may not function well in large group settings. I remember going to a couple of icebreakers where I was just like, you've got to be kidding me. Like one of them was having people taste weird drinks to see if they could tell what the drinks were. And you had to participate. There was no choice. And I remember meeting somebody there that was like, this was their nightmare, right? They were like, I don't want to be here. This is awful. And so what I'm talking about is everybody socializes in different ways. I think we can kind of agree on that, right? And how do we take that social to more and more inclusive level? So you can reduce anxiety in people by identifying and discussing what's going to happen in advance. And then also giving people the opportunity to maybe not be included in that certain activity, but still be in the room, or to have a quiet place for a break. You know, if you're when people on a conference, I like to leave and maybe just go somewhere by myself for 15 minutes and regroup. Right. Well, that happens a lot of times. Observing and asking people, right, and thinking, you know, maybe they're not having as much fun. So meeting people where they're at. Oh, hey, I noticed that you weren't comfortable sitting, you know, between those two people. Did you want a spot at the back where it's more comfortable? Maybe it's away from people. Again, I don't enjoy sitting for long periods of time. I like to be up and against the wall or walking around, right? That doesn't mean I don't want to be included. It means that's how my brain functions best. And it's also really important to develop awareness that, you know, not everybody loves eye contact. I don't make eye contact when I'm talking, but when somebody's talking to me, I can have a pretty intense stare because I'm trying to listen. And so the more that you can be inclusive about people understanding where people are coming from, right? Not everybody likes to make eye contact. Not everybody likes to handshake. You know, not everybody is a fan of hugging. So it's really important to talk about these things in advance and saying to people like, hey, if you're not somebody that likes to be touched, that's okay. But we still want you to be included. So maybe we're going to do the colored badges where green says, hey, I'm okay with a handshake and a high five. Or yellow says, I'm just okay with talking to you. And red means, please don't touch me. And that's okay, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's okay to have the boundaries. It doesn't make you less of a worker or less of part of the team. It means that you understand that that's what works for you. Okay. I don't see any questions in the chat yet. I'll just do another, like, any questions, please put them in the chat and I'll get the session host to throw them over to me. And I hope this is making sense to everybody. Ugh. I apologize. My London fog just came apart in my drink and now it's coming. Ugh, there we go. Sorry. Okay. So what are some, and this is not mine. I have this cited in, it's not on my side, but I do have it cited in my slide deck. So there are some tips here, and this is a really good one too. Making sure that your emails are brief and to the point can really be helpful, and they don't have a lot of like jargon or slangs in them. Sending emails to be very specific as to what you want, and thinking about like fidgeting, hands moving doesn't mean that they're not focusing. Those are all ways of stimming. If you're not familiar with stimming is a way that our bodies helps calm us down. And so sometimes for people that might be their knee jiggling when they're listening, that might be drawing on paper while they're listening. It may just mean that they're, you know, chewing on their nail. That is all forms of stimulation, and that stimming in our mouths or our hands sends signals to our brains that can help us to calm down. Short reviews and recognizing that people may struggle to stay on task can be important, and helping them to come back to that task. Breaking things up into small pieces. This is another one. When I work with families, and one of the things or organizations is, I like to say, like, you know, think about it like little appetizers coming along. And so you don't want to fill up, just do small little steps. So what's the first thing that they need to do for this assignment? What's the second thing they need to do? And even having little checklists that they can mark off the boxes as they go along. I've always found that my students do really well with that. And joking doesn't have to be completely off the table. I don't joke about people's challenges, but I mean joking in general. But if you notice somebody's not laughing, right? Maybe after a couple of times you may realize, oh, I don't think that maybe they understand sarcasm. And that's 100% legit. And that doesn't mean that they don't want to be included. It just means that they may not fully understand what's going on. Some other tips that I really want to talk about is leveraging support tools. So I don't know if anybody's ever utilized support tools out there. I know some people have tried like Monday.com. I'm trying to think of the other one. What was it called? I'll have to think about it, and I can post it after. But there are some tools, but it's important to note, like I said, that our brains are all different. And so with ADHD, the whole it takes 30 days to form a habit actually doesn't work for our brains. Our brains thrive on dopamine, right? They love the chaos sometimes because it keeps us on edge. And so people are like, it takes 30 days to build a habit. It actually doesn't, for our brains anyway. That's a whole different thing. So supporting students can mean different things. It can mean something as simple as having 2 separate times to meet with students, one where it's like an open house discussion where students can work together, and then maybe having a second one where it's quiet, dim, and students can come in and they can talk to the teacher and then they can go back, and it's a very quiet time for them to work. Both promote the students to be in the classroom and with groups, right? But they also give them 2 times where they may feel comfortable. Maybe they want to attend both, right? And that's okay too. There's multiple ways into task lists. So just because you're like, I want you to do this and this and this, and then walk away, doesn't mean everybody thrives off a checklist. I know I don't. For me, I thrive on the idea of understanding what I want to accomplish and then working my way backwards and then figuring out how that works for me. And some people may say, like, I really want to help with this part, but not this part. Is there a way for me to kind of, do a different approach? Coordinating solutions across your classrooms, if you're doing multiple teaching or if you're a support teacher, there's a couple different ways that I've found that you can help students to organize their thoughts using one method across multiple classrooms. So for example, I've done colored cards with students. Colors really work well for ADHD, but I've also used colored cards where if a term is something that they can connect to long-term thinking, and it's really simple for them to understand and remember, they put it on a green card. I love the green, yellow, red system works for me. Yellow means it's a little challenging, but they can try and think about something that they get connected to. And then red is like, this is brand new. I've never heard it before. And so we've done these colored cards for all of their classes. And then what we do is we work on the red to see if we can figure out something that's existing in the long-term memory, because that's the key here, right? When people are learning and they want to learn more, is to connect it to long-term memory. But that doesn't necessarily work for everybody. So I have other things that I've done with other students in binders to help them with the class. And like I said, I'm kind of short on time, so I have to, but again, you can reach out to me. And then thinking about the amount of effort it takes and then syncing with students in their to-do list, right? So ADHD paralysis is when we have so many things going on, we don't know which way to turn, and we just kind of freeze. And then a student will be like, I didn't do anything because I didn't know what to do first. That is real. And so what I work with students on is, having like little Post-it notes like this. You probably can't see them, sorry. And then a big whiteboard. And then we map out their classes, and then we map out their to-dos. And then we start figuring out, how are we going to know where to start? What's the most important? And then how do we know what's the least important? And we work our way kind of through that. And sometimes seeing it can feel very overwhelming at first, but I always try to give students the chance to reflect on, it is doable, and it's just starting with the first bite or the first step. Okay. I don't know if the session host can hear me or not. I'm trying to stay on time. I know I only have like 4 minutes left. Is there any questions or anything that they want answered so that I can answer them before our time is up? I don't know if they can hear me or not. I apologize. I don't know. Gonna type in here and see. I can't see any of your questions. I do apologize. Is the session host there? Okay. I don't know if anybody's there. So, ugh. All right. Well, that's okay. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm on LinkedIn. So I apologize. I can't see any questions you might have, and that really bothers me. Please feel free to find me on LinkedIn, Delaney King, and I will. Oh, perfect. They're there. Okay. Is there any questions in the chat from anybody that I can answer? Because I know I'm getting close to time. I don't want to keep going if I'm going to miss any questions. The session host is here. I'm just going to give her a second to see if there's any questions I can answer. Are there any questions, session host? Okay, while I wait for that, like I said, LinkedIn, you can find me. I'll also, my email is DelaneyJKing@gmail.com. So Delaney, as it's spelled, DELANEY, J as in jam, king@gmail.com. Please feel free to send me a message via Gmail. I'd be happy to help out wherever I can. This is something that I do for a living. I work with companies and educators and all that to help them structure the most inclusive environments and work with, you know, the neurodivergent, the twice exceptional, and all those wonderful things. So I know I only have like a minute left. I did have additional slides, but I don't think we're going to get to them. So I don't see any questions. Session host, are there any questions in the chat? I hope this was helpful. And like I said, I apologize that we started late, so I wasn't able to get through all my slide deck and my case study. But I hope it was helpful for everybody to be here and to kind of see the tips and tricks. Keep in mind, like, everything, there's no one size fits all approach. These are just some general ideas that I've used in the past that I found worked really well, right? But you may have students that come in that are very unique and you're not sure where to start. And that's where it's really good to have this community where we can reach out to each other and discuss, you know, best practices and things like that. I know it's becoming lunchtime. Okay, so just said no other questions in the chat. Thank you for joining. Like I said, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I wish everybody a happy Halloween and safe travels if you're in New Orleans and you're traveling home. And I hope it was helpful. Yeah.